Did you read The Boy Crisis?
I don't think I read that one.
Oh my gosh, I highly recommend it to everyone. Like, even if you don't have children or if you don't have a son, it's just a really interesting insight into kind of where we are societally and even globally. But they were bringing up statistics about Japan specifically, and
Yeah.
it's like the average age of someone losing their virginity in Japan is like 30 years old.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so, like, they are not having sex, and, I think it's them and Korea, like, obviously South Korea, um, are going through kind of like, what's the word? Like, I guess depopulation, like, they're just
Yeah.
not having children either, so they're getting married super late, and then, obviously, there's the question about fertility once you're not even getting married until, like, you're in your 30s, so then you're just,
Yeah.
like, gonna have these races that just kinda disappear because of I would assume fear around sex and lack of purpose, and, it gets into a lot of problems with boys, and he has a whole section on, school shootings in there as well, and he kind of correlates it to the lack of father figure in the house. He does get into some mental health issues,
Hmm.
which is interesting because we don't ever hear that brought up. We don't hear, "Oh, well, he was schizophrenic or he was whatever, antisocial." We don't hear that side of it, and I think it's because we don't wanna stigmatize mental health, but it's like, to
Yeah.
what cost? Like, if there's a problem and we are all on board with, lowering
Yeah.
gun violence, I don't think anyone is like, "Yes, I want more of that." Everyone is like, "This is a problem, how do we solve it?" We have to be honest about all of the contributing factors. So if we're just saying, "Oh,
Yeah.
it's Hollywood," or it's porn, or it's, XYZ, but we're not being honest about everything that's going on biologically with this person and even within their own home. Like, are they getting beat at home? Do they not have a father? Do they not have a mother? Are they getting bullied at school? Like, what are all of the contributing factors to this person doing a horrific act? And you see it too, and I guess, like, sorry to bring it up, but it just seems like I can't stop but see, like, the parallels because it's when people are involved with sexual violence or human trafficking, they automatically blame porn. And it's like,
Mm.
well, that seems like a really big leap to me. I think that there's a lot of underlying issues that we're not talking about, and why are we not talking about them?
Yeah. Well, I think, like you said, a lot of it does come down to the politics. So on the right, you'll see people who don't want to talk about gun control, so they'll talk about the video games, and this is one thing that I did criticize President Trump in writing, for if we ever really, by the way, do end up with a fascist government in the U.S., I'm doomed. I'm the first one at the wall is going to get shot. I've written too many things down to deny them at this point. But obviously I don't think that's actually where we're going. I think there's a lot of hyperbole around that. But yeah, I mean, so there's that sense on the right, people don't want to talk about like any kind of gun control sort of stuff, and I understand some of the reasons why they're suspicious, about the left's views on that. And it would help if people on the left wouldn't say, yes, literally, we're going to come take your guns away.
Right.
First off, but that's another discussion. Yeah, I think with the both the mental health and the fatherlessness issue, yeah, I think all these things come down to like uncomfortable truths that we don't want to talk about on one side or the other. I mean, on the right, of course, having lots of guns around is going to contribute to the homicide rate. It's hard to deny that on some level. And I don't advocate a UK, Australia, like take everybody's guns away sort of response to that. But we ought to be at least able to say that this is a contributing factor on some level. On the other hand, of course, mental health increases people's risk for violence. This is very, very clear in the literature. So there is this weird sort of like thing on the left where they're very worried about stigmatization of the mentally ill, and I get it because that certainly is a real concern. But you can't lie. There are ways of discussing this issue. You point out like most mentally ill people don't commit violent crimes. There is an elevated risk. They are not bad people. They literally don't understand what they're doing, and if you deny that there's any link whatsoever, you actually remove any impetus for society to be concerned about this, in the sense of, well, then why should we bother buying or building mental health facilities if they don't hurt us,
Mhm.
because people tend to respond better to incentives that benefit themselves. So if you're saying we should build mental health centers because it will benefit the mentally ill, that's not a persuasive argument. If, on the other hand, you say we should build mental health centers so some of them won't attack you, that's a persuasive argument. Is the reality of it. And people will make decisions that are self-interested.
Mhm.
And same thing with the fatherless stuff. I think with the fatherless, once again, the evidence is pretty clear that lack of a father figure in a family is associated with a host of negative outcomes for both boys and girls, but particularly boys,
Mhm.
including crime. Right? But there again, I think people are concerned about stigmatizing single mothers because, of course, they're working hard, they're doing their best. There's no doubt that that is true. There are some racial disparities in fatherlessness, so people feel like, well, if we point out that fatherlessness is particularly high in one community versus another one, that is going to promote racial stigma or something of that sort. But again, I think that you can't lie, though. I mean, there are ways of trying to give a nuanced and complicated argument of saying like these things are true, but that doesn't mean like everybody in this community comes from a fatherless home, or that certainly their fatherlessness exists in most ethnic communities at different levels. So there are ways I think of handling that reduce the potential for racial stigma or stigma towards the mentally ill or whatever. But what seems to happen is people are just like you said, either ignoring the issue whatsoever, pretending it doesn't exist, or lying about it. I imagine lying is hard. Maybe people believe their own narrative. I don't know. But with the mental illness stuff, but what they're saying is certainly not true. That there's no link between mental illness and and criminal violence, for instance. So, but I think these things actually end up not helping the communities that they're supposedly defending. So it's making it harder for the mentally ill to get services. It's making it harder to intervene in lower income communities where fatherlessness tends to be very high. If you don't, maybe there are ways we can promote fatherlessness, but if you don't acknowledge that it's a problem, then nobody's going to tackle it. And that's not helping those people.
I totally agree. I think it could, because until you start lifting out the layers and seeing what's really underneath all of this, you can't even start to formulate a plan or a solution to anything. And if you have these kids that are hurting, it's that old adage that hurt people hurt people. Well, if we don't know what we're looking for, how do we help them before they hurt other people? And then this thing just keeps perpetuating. And then you see also, and I think that this is one of those things where we talk about the pendulum going too far. It's like this rehabilitation idea with kids. So,
Mm-hmm.
one argument that I've seen is that these kids will start to show antisocial tendencies, like that are getting them suspended after, like, one time after another after another. And instead of doing an expulsion or maybe some other intervention, they're just like, we're just going to keep putting a band aid on it. And then all of a sudden, this really troubled kid who's just been rehabilitated instead of like, I don't wanna say treated, but for lack of better words, treated, nurtured, cared for, and repaired, ends up in a situation that could have been preventable.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the reality is that we really don't have an effective intervention system for mental health at any level. Whether we're talking about school kids who are starting to show problems, behavior problems in schools, which I don't work in the schools, but I'm hearing a lot of reports suggesting that teachers are really having a tough time of it right now because there are so many kids, but maybe particularly post COVID, that are really struggling with developmental behavioral problems and this sort of stuff. And kind of consistent with what you said, that the teachers feel defanged, that the administration is really not supporting them with these kids. But also, with adults, that if you have someone who has schizophrenia, or whether they're a minor or an adult, there's really not much support for these people, and so they end up homeless or unemployed, or they're in really bad outcomes for these people. And I'm sort of an advocate for this idea. We really need to start developing some kind of state-sponsored, long-term, inpatient type care for people that are really showing. Like, I'm sort of familiar with the Nicholas Cruz case, to some extent. I actually, consulted for a while with the prosecution in that case. But there's a situation where he had an individual who, throughout his lifespan, I mean, just showed problem after problem after problem, way back to elementary school. And at some point, you kind of think like, this person really needed to be in a facility, where he could get care. He was separated from society, so he wasn't a danger to other kids or young adults or whatever else. Now, of course, the problems are several. One, someone has to pay for this, right? So there's going to be more taxes. That's going to be an argument you have to try to sell to the general populace of voters. Two, you have to make sure there's good due process in these facilities, so people aren't just being locked away forever with no chance of resuming normal life if they get better. And also, you have to make sure the care is humane, right? That is the best standard of care, evidence-based medicine, not like what happened in like the 1920s, in asylums, which was oftentimes very cruel and not very effective. So there are a lot of, I think, cognitive blocks to why people are hesitant to recreate some sort of, for lack of a better word, asylum system. But I think really at some point we're going to have to acknowledge that we have to have some kind of long-term care. We can definitely do it a lot better than historically long-term care looked like in the United States or anywhere else. But right now, what we're doing is not working. Some of these individuals are committing crimes. The others, even if they're not committing crimes, a lot of them end up homeless or drug addicted or alcohol addicted or have a variety of other problems. And we can go to any big city and we can see people with obvious schizophrenia just walking around, and they're not all, most of them aren't hurting anybody, but I don't know that just leaving them on the streets the right choice either,
No.
exactly. So, and sure, maybe most of them will never be violent, but you can make, I think to voters, you make the argument of like, we'll just, if we can just get all these people help, which may be long-term inpatient care, some of them might have been violent, and we won't ever know who was who, but that might reduce at least a few incidences. It won't clear up like gang violence, but it might clear up a few acts of violence, and that's probably good for those people that are now not going to be victims of crime, because these people are getting the care they need in these facilities. But we'll see. Once I become Grand Poobah, I'll make these changes. But
No,